Hello there, friends. Welcome back. This is the second of two videos related to the small world atlas. You will hopefully remember that this atlas was kindly sent to us by Kevin at the Whisper Corner ASMR after he shot a very detailed series of videos where he went page by page through this very detailed and fragile atlas. So I encourage you to check those out if you haven't seen them yet. We took a look at this atlas in the first video that I did, and in that research that I did for the video, I came to understand that this atlas was published by a long-standing map publishing company from Scotland called Bartholemew. They were eventually acquired by Collins, but in all of the company's history, they continued to publish a miniature world atlas, which gave me the idea for today's video. I thought it might be illuminating to try to procure as recent an example as I could find of another Bartholomew miniature world atlas so that we could compare some map panels between the two little books to get a sense of how the map maker's art had changed in all of that time. And that brings us to this fellow here, the Bartholomew Mini World Atlas. And this atlas the contents of this atlas are copyrighted 1984, but most recently revised 1990. So this is a 1990 version of the atlas. And we're going to compare this to the 1894 version that we got from Kevin. And hopefully that will yield some interesting comparisons. Now, we're not going to do a detailed analysis of the 1990 book, but let's flip through a little bit as a way of introduction to start to get a sense of the presentation style. It's, I think, very much what you would expect. It's very modern. The maps are very clean. They take advantage of all of the modern data and techniques that are available to us now. Yeah, it's I think it's very much what we would expect from a modern cartographic product. But the question before us today is how does this map making compare to our 1894 example? And I'd like to try to, the best I'm able, to do some side-by-side comparisons in frame so we can most effectively go back and forth between the two examples. And with these spines, and particularly with the damage and fragility of the older atlas, it was going to be very difficult to hold these books side by side so that we could compare them easily. So I took the liberty of scanning and printing a few examples from each so that we could lay them flat on the board and take a look at them. The question is, with an entire world to choose from, what do we pick as maps to compare? Well, I I went from extreme to extreme on that. I thought to myself, what map in the old atlas is likely to be the most accurate if the publisher was a company from Scotland? And of course, that may be a completely, well, not may. That's a silly argument. Bartholomew would have had, their checkers in all parts of the world, I'm sure. But for lack of a better rationale, I decided that Scotland would be one of the panels we would compare. A Scottish company, so we will compare some Scottish panels. You can see in the 1990 version, Scotland is split over a couple of pages, not counting the much smaller version here. I did not scan this page. I scanned here and here, here and here. And then on the other extreme, I thought, what maps are likely to be the least accurate in 1894? And I assumed that those would be the polar regions. This is the North Pole panel in the new atlas. So I scanned this one. We'll compare the North Pole. And I scanned the South Pole. So we will take a look at Scotland, the North Pole, and the South Pole on our scans. That we can lay flat on the board and get a sense about how these two atlases compare. So, let's take a look at that, shall we? All right. We're going to try to really fill the frame with these pieces of paper so we can really see the detail. These are the scans that I've printed out. So they do suffer from, first of all, coming from small map pages and then being scanned and then being printed, but I think we have the detail we need before us to draw some interesting comparisons. You can see we have our 1894 example on the left. We have our 1990 example on the right. So we're looking at nearly a century of difference in the map maker's art here, right in front of our eyes. I wonder if anything stands out to us right away. And to me, I guess I'll say it right here at the outset so that I don't keep repeating myself, and this is not a surprise, this is to be expected, but to me, the biggest difference is just how shall I put it? The 1894 work seems to have more of a what I'll call a handcrafted character about it. Just in the style of the letters and just the whole presentation, you get a sense of the people that were seated at their drafting tables, drawing the stuff out. Whereas the modern map, certainly more, well, we presume, more accurate, given the limitations of the projection that we're seeing here, but very clean, very computer aided, with perfect typography and different colors being used. So it has a much more kind of a I don't mean to be reductive in anything that I'm saying. Obviously, I have an affinity for old things. It's to my eye, it's a little bit more sterile in its approach, but it's clearly a very acceptable modern piece of map work. So let's orient these in a certain manner so that we can see what they have in common and what they might how they might differ. Let's see, the newer map has its 0 degrees right down here in the center on the bottom. Let's find the 0 degrees on this map. On the older map, it's right here. So as long as we have this, grab a pointer. So as long as our 0 point here is pointed straight down, then the maps will be oriented to each other so that we can more easily compare between the two. I will say that Some of the most interesting things to me are the bits of data that were shown on the old map that no longer make sense or are no longer needed on the new map. Let's see, let's find an example. The 1894 map has various dotted lines that progress all throughout the map. And if we can find one and look at how it's labeled, I guess the first one I would point out is this line here that's made up of little, I think they might be little triangles. And look how this one is labeled. Northern limit of permanent human habitation. That is a pretty interesting thing to point out on a map. But we don't see that in our 1990 example. Calling out a piece of information like that gives you very much a sense that, that people haven't made it to all the reaches of the world yet, all of the various extremes. It's kind of a reminder, perhaps, that there was still lots of exploration to go. And I guess speaking of exploration, another thing that the old map has that the new map does not are some notations of the various North Pole expeditions that had taken place prior to 1894. There's a marker here for DeLong, 1881. And there are several markers on this side of the map. It's a little hard to read, but this says Greeley's furthest, 1882, I believe. Perhaps it says farthest. I think it says farthest. There's a mark here for Markham's farthest, 1876. This says Perry's farthest. I believe that's 1827. It's interesting that in 1894, they're still drawing attention to something that happened in 1827. I sure hope I'm not getting that wrong. And it looks like 1827. But no indication on the newer map about North Pole expeditions. That's another bit of data that was dropped. Let's see, there's a line here that refers to the southern limit of drift ice. And this refers to the boundaries between open ocean and the part of the ocean that contains drifting ice, and then the part that is solid ice. I think we have this line here between the blue, the light blue, and the white. I believe that's meant to denote where the drift ice stops and permanent ice begins. And then this line is the drift ice line. Now that information, I do believe, is still on the modern map. We have a line here that says average minimum extent of sea ice. It's very hard to see the blue dashed line in the scan, but that does seem to be a piece of information that they kept all those years. Although I'm sure that line has also changed over the century as well. The modern map calls out the North Magnetic Pole. Right there. I don't believe let's check our orientation. I don't believe the old map speaks to the magnetic pole and the fact that it's not in the same place as the North Pole itself. Another bit of information that seems to have survived over the centuries is this line here. You can see a label, Northern Limit of Trees. The point beyond which trees cannot survive anymore. And on the new map, right here, in another very faint line, you can see it labeled Tree Limit. was wondering if we should expect to see any differences in the geographic depictions between these two maps, and there are certainly some. Just glancing here, let's make sure I'm comparing apples to apples here. All right, if we take a look at this little cluster of islands, compare it to this region here, we do see kind of a different arrangement of that in the center of the frame. Are we still aligned? Yeah. So if we check, we can see that we have this little landmass here is the same as this one. This piece of land is here, so we are talking about the same bit. But if this is the largest island and this is the largest island, there seems to be a split here that's more exaggerated than it is here. It seems to be kind of a collection of three, whereas this is, I suppose, still a collection of three if you count this one and this one. But the orientations seem to be off. Make sure my 0 is still pointing down. It is. So with the benefit of satellites and better aerial photography and more modern techniques, you can be a lot more accurate about these smaller landforms. Another thing that catches my eye is the difference between this bit of land. It's kind of hard to tell what they're describing here because there's so many words that they've packed on top of this. But it looks like they're describing a bit of land that pokes out from the edge of the permanent ice here, compared to a very small collection of bits of land here. I'm not talking about this island, which is here, and that seems to track fairly well. But this business seems to be much more prominently depicted on the old map than the new. I wonder if changes in the permanent ice have anything to do with that. It's very interesting to see these two styles side by side. What a difference a century makes, yeah? Why don't we flip the world over and take a look at the South Pole? Side by side again. Let's see. On the new map we have 180 at the bottom this time, so where's our 180? Here's our 180 on the old map, so we're roughly aligned here. On the new map, they've chosen to show Antarctica in white against a largely white map with just a yellow border. It makes for a fairly low contrast presentation, which perhaps doesn't come across as well in our scan. And then here's our older version. You can see the title here, Antarctica. You may recall from our first video on this atlas that the head of Bartholomew at this time, who was John George Bartholomew, was the one who coined this term for the southern continent, for this atlas, and it stuck, and we still call it that today. But interesting is the parenthetical language here: unexplored South Polar Continent. That is a phrase that is, of course, not needed on the 1990 map, because as of 1990, we have research stations and exploration happening all over the continent. All of these little red dots are locations of various outposts and stations run by the various countries. There's Scott in New Zealand and McMurdo, the U.S. Many of these red dots have their names and responsible countries listed. You can see a lot of them right there. But as of 1894, that had not happened yet. I think they are something like 4 years away from the first South Pole expedition at this time. There are some interesting designators on the old map, like this pack ice line here. There's a label that says ice 1842 right here. There's pack ice noted up here. And a few border labels extending out into the ocean, such as the average limit of drift ice here and the northern limit of drift ice here. In the modern map, we have a label here, average minimum extent of sea ice. And I believe that is the only mention of sea ice on the modern map. We have the South Magnetic Pole listed here, but no mention of that on the older map. You'll see that we have Wilkesland labeled here and a bunch of other lands named all along this coast. This is probably worthy of its own separate little bit of research. I assume that these are claims made by various countries. You can see that on the new map, this is still called Wilkesland here, but the coast isn't riddled with individual names anymore. I see that, for example, this bit of coast here is called Knox Coast now. And there was a Knox Land on the old map. So that's a bit of a holdover. Kind of doing some comparisons right here in real time to see if I see any other holdovers from these old labels. I wonder if there's something. This little, there's a label here, Terra Adelaide. very close to the magnetic South Pole, and there's a Adderley land label here. No, but I was wondering if any of the viewers of this channel have spent any time at any of the Antarctic research stations. I've seen a documentary of life at one of the stations down there. I will confess it's some part of me wonders what it would have been like to be in a line of science or industry that would have carried me down there for a tour to do some research or something down there. I think that would have been very interesting. Have any of you been to Antarctica? I know the availability of high internet speeds is not quite as good there. I find myself wondering now if any of my videos have ever played into anyone's ears at the very bottom of the world. Another interesting topic for further research are these two references right here, because these don't make it to the new map either, although I'm sure the features still exist. This says Mount Terror, and this says Erebus Volcano. Just outside the 80-degree line. The 80-degree line is here on the new map, but they're not mentioned. Although further inland we have Mount Kirkpatrick and Mount Markham. But then those two are not mentioned here. But again, this was unexplored at the time. Another very interesting comparison. If you like that sort of thing. All right. So let's move from these extremes to something much closer to home for Bartholomew and take a look at how Scotland is represented. As I mentioned, Scotland is on a couple of pages in the new atlas. So I have a couple of pieces of paper here. I'm not going to be able to line these up perfectly. Perhaps I should have taped them together before the video. And in the old atlas, there are a couple of scales for Scotland that are available. There's this one with the country on one page, which I suppose is the best way to compare these two maps. It's also available split across 3 pages, but that's much more close up, of course, and more detailed. I'm actually very curious if you live in Scotland, whether you see anything on this map that surprises you or strikes you as interesting or unexpected. I certainly don't expect any big geographic discrepancies between the old and the new maps here in Scotland, because after all, this was right in their backyard, Bartholomew's backyard. So I don't have a long list of points to compare between the two maps. The one thing that does strike me about this map of Scotland at this scale is how densely they've chosen to pack in the various named features. It's just pretty much every available bit of space is taken up by the name of something. And we have to remember that, this is a scan of a much smaller map. Let's compare that for a moment. That's on 26. Here's the original. This, again, is a pocket atlas, and this map is absolutely packed with very small writing. It, frankly, gives me the impression of a map that was drafted at a much larger size, and it was filled with features based on the size of the original composition. And it might have looked a little more appropriately balanced at that size. But when you shrink it down to a size that you can put in your pocket, the detail gets pretty dense. Compared to the 1990 version, you see a lot more blank areas on the modern approach. They've thinned out the level of detail, but they're also able to use small fonts that are still readable at a small size because they're, they come from a computer, and it's much easier to get them to reproduce cleanly when they're very small. In the older map, of course, we have the hand lettering, or, I'm sorry, what I assume is hand lettering, which gives the map much more of an artisan, handmade appearance, but it is very, very dense with features. That said, I confess, and this should be no surprise to any of you, that I do prefer the look of the map from 1894. Certainly, if I was going to have a map framed and put on my wall, it would be the older map. And obviously that has nothing to do with accuracy or anything like that. It just has to do with the sense that I have that as a work of art, an older map like this gives you the sense that you're seeing the hand of the artist on the page. I've used that phrase to myself several times when I've thought through what I wanted to talk about in this comparison video. And to me, the most interesting difference that a century has made in the mapmaker's art is that the hand of the artist is, I'm trying to choose my words carefully. I don't want to say it's not as apparent or not as visible, but it manifests in a different way now. In this old map, I very much have the sense that you can see the variability, the line to line, the letter to letter, the color to color variability that comes from a person drawing on paper. The same way you see brush strokes in a painting, the same way you see the chisel marks in a sculpture, the same way you see brush strokes in a painting. If you get close to a painting and you see the brush lines. You see the movement. You can visualize the painter's hand at that point on the canvas. All of those years ago, you can visualize the person standing there creating that art. I get the same feel when I look at a map like this. I sense the map maker's hand on this work. I don't sense the map maker's hand on this work, even though it's clearly a more accurate work. And that's not to say that this isn't the product of talented map makers. It clearly is, but that talent is masked a little bit by the cleanness of the computer-generated presentation. Be clear in what I am saying. I'm certainly not saying that there's less art here, less know-how, or less craftsmanship. But I will say that to the eye, the final product to me appears less handcrafted because of modern fonts and layout and production techniques. Clearly, if you want the most accurate map at your fingertips, the 1990 map is the only choice. But if I want something that gives me the hand of the artist, the hand of the maker on the page, I find myself drawn to the older work. And again, that should be no surprise. But you know that we are fans of cartography here on this channel, no matter what the age, no matter what the generation, no matter what no matter what point in history we're talking about. And I hope that being able to compare side by side a century's difference in map making has been as interesting and illustrative for you as it has for me. This has been a lot of fun, and I want to thank again Kevin, the Whisper Corner ASMR. Without his generous gift, these two videos would not have been possible. So again, please pay him a visit and check out his wonderful videos. Thanks again for all of your support, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.